No, I'm not pulling a story. You just didn't have time to be scared. Yep. You had a job to do. You had all your mates. There was 10, a crew of 10. And I can honestly say I never felt scared. I mean, you were anxious, the same as you would be in a car that was going at a high speed. You'd be aware of things, but I don't know. We just got used to what we had to do and did it happily. Well, I was just as happy to get out after 4 years.
You'd had enough?
And I wanted to get out and get married.
Yeah.
And very soon after coming out, I went to the university and began a university course. And a year after I got out of the Air Force, we got married. Well, that was, you know, as far as I was concerned, the aim of life rather than sticking with the Air Force. Yeah. I knew that if I was going to do anything worthwhile, I would have to have either a university degree or something like that, so that the earlier I went and did that, the earlier we could continue into our married life together.
And did you already know your wife before you went?
Oh yes. No, she was a great strength to me in a way. We just presumed that that I'd get through the war and that she'd carry on with what she was teaching at the time. And she was quite relaxed in terms of what I was doing and knew it was necessary to be done. And so we had a kind of an understanding that we were in it together, and waited for the time when we would be able to get married a year after I came out of the Air Force. Oh, as little time as possible. I came back to Australia, and by that time all of our bombing and activities were put to an end because the war was over. There was nothing further to be done as far as the Air Force was concerned. But there was a bit of training that I kept on with, and there was a training school for navigators down near Bairnsdale, and it was a bit of a come down to fly these old Anson planes that were only just able to lumber into the sky. But there was a time when I did a bit of training with them, and there was a story where one of the young pilots who was just off course, we were given a course to come up to Richmond in Sydney, and this guy had been looking at the film about Mrs. Miniver and her son, and Mrs. Miniver's son in the film was a Spitfire pilot. And every time he took off to go on a bash, he would go above his mother's house and pull down and this young guy who'd barely finished his flying training decided that he would come up and we'd fly over Sydney Harbour Bridge, you know, nowhere, no bands, fly over Sydney Harbour Bridge, and he started to pull his engines off like Mrs. Miniver's. And I said, you do that and you'll be on a charge, because poor old Anson planes were barely keeping going anyhow, and if you fiddle with the engines. So anyhow, he reluctantly agreed. I had a commission, but he didn't. He was just training. So there were lots of little bits and pieces like that happened that were quite incidental and made the time in the Air Force quite a happy thing. That was after the period of the fighting that I'd been in, and we got into this other training sort of things. Oh yes, we knew the day the war had finished. We were very much in communication with what was going on in Australia, and Darwin was right in the middle of Australian affairs, and once the war had been successfully concluded, well, we didn't go out on these rather hairy trips that we'd been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, but decided to get ourselves south as quickly as we could and to get out and get on with living. You do your own thing. You get out as soon as you can, personally. And our crew had been broken up when I was doing this other strange flying with these boys who were just straight off course and learning their direction finding and so on. So when we came out at the end of the war, I got leave as soon as I could, and then went ahead and got myself organised to go to university, and and start on the new life. It all happened fairly quietly, you know, and we knew that we were no longer needed and required. So ultimately our documents of discharge, our discharge documents were given to us, and we were set out and we were free. So it was a strange, interesting time, because everybody, you know, in Australia knew that there was nothing more to fight about. So the sooner you could get back home, the better. And that's what we decided to do. I did later on go back because our prisoners of war were dependent on Catalinas to come home as quickly as possible if they had been sick. So I had a couple of trips from Sydney up to Manila Harbour in the Philippines. These guys had been sick and were brought to Manila by Air Force people, and we were responsible to get them all the way back down to Sydney. So that was one of the most worthwhile things of the war as far as I was concerned, bringing these guys, Australian boys, who'd been prisoners of war. And they were just so thankful. You can imagine, after being a prisoner of a Japanese for a while, they were so thankful, and they'd do anything. If you say, oh, let's clear that, they'd immediately get up. There was no tomfoolery or questioning at all what you said. And they would tell us a little bit of the stories of what had happened, and it was very sad, most of them. And of course, they were guys who'd been picked out as being rather sick and needed as quick a repatriation as possible. That was the most worthwhile time of the war as far as I was concerned, bringing these guys back home again. So all that sort of happened in a kind of a maelstrom of disorganisation, but I stayed as long as I felt I could be useful, while at the same time looking forward to the time when I'd be able to go to university and begin life again. The friendships of our crew did continue. Some of the guys lived interstate. Now, quite a few were in Brisbane, and some over in South Australia. But the skipper was Reg Marr, who became a Solicitor General. He became Solicitor General of New South Wales. Ted was our navigator, and when Ted died, the word came out that he was second in command in the Mines Department of New South Wales, that he had died, and so his family asked me to take his funeral. When Reg died, the family asked me to take his funeral, because by that time I was a minister, so I was doing that kind of thing anyhow. We kept in touch with one another on a very strong, it was more like a brotherhood, you know. They weren't strangers, you knew one another really, really well. The rest of the crew scattered because there were some who lived in Adelaide, they went home. Somebody else lived in Orange, and I didn't have the chance to catch up with them. But that final time of together sort of drifted off into normality then. And but we had good relationships all the way through, which was tremendous to be able to do that. Reg was, I think I told you the story the other day about the rescue of these guys, and Reg was given a DFC, Distinguished Flying Cross, and the rest of the crew was recognised as being a crew who had been mentioned in dispatches. We were just given an official word of congratulations when we saved the guys who were crash landed on the little Cartier Island place. I had a story yesterday. Yeah. You're able to piece these bits and...
I put them back, yeah.
Yeah.